Good day to you, algebraites. On this day, we're going to be multiplying two polynomials. And what we mean by that is something like this. We might have a monomial times a trinomial, or we might have a binomial times a binomial, etc. So, by way of warm-up, go ahead and do each one of these operations, pause, and then check the answers against mine. Now, for each one of these, we just did multiplication here. Here we had to multiply the 8 to get this, then slide it over, multiply the 1 to get 450, and then we had to add down. This algorithm is going to be extremely important later. And lastly, we were just subtracting, so we distributed that negative, and then we combined like terms. Remember that these cube terms are like, these quadratic terms are like, but this is not like with anything because those guys do not have like terms, so we just wrote them as we saw it. I did put this in standard form with a 3, 2, 1, and a 0 there. Now, by way of introduction, let's talk about area. The area of a rectangle is A equals LW, where L usually stands for length and W stands for width. Alternatively, you might see this, that area is BH, that is where we say base, and the H is the height. I do want to point out one thing to you about base and height. Base and height are always perpendicular, as are length and W. Length and width are always perpendicular. This symbol here means perpendicular. That means they meet at a 90-degree angle. So we're going to find the area of each rectangle. Well, remember that area is length times width. Area is length times width. I'm going to temporarily ignore my centimeters and bring it back in at the end. So area here is going to be 7 times 14. And so in the end, my answer is 98 centimeters squared. So if we wanted to know what the area is, 98 centimeters squared. Well, that's well and good when we know both sides. Well, what happens when we know one side but not the other? What's the area? Well, the problem that a lot of people face is we can conceptualize 98 well, but when we don't know something, we often just say we don't know and we don't go on. Well, it's true that we don't know the length, but based on what we don't know, we could actually find what the actual area is. So again, watch the magic. We have area is length times width. In this case, area is 7 times x, and that's it. My area is 7x centimeters squared, and sometimes you're going to see parentheses around that bit right there. So what do we do when we have even more that we don't know? I don't know x, but something's being added to that x, a 13. Well, let's follow the exact same process. Area is length times width. So area is 7, but this time we're going to multiply it by the x plus 13. Now, if we go back in time, when you first learned this, you did distributive property here, so that gives me 7 times x, and then you distributed the 7 to the 13 to get your 91. So there's my actual answer. What is the area? It's 7x plus 91. And all of that is centimeters squared. So note we're going to have to put our parentheses around that. There. So even when we know stuff, we can do problems. And when we don't know stuff, we can still work through and get some sort of an answer. So we're going to apply that same idea, and we're going to look at 3 methods when we are multiplying a monomial times a polynomial. In this case, this polynomial is a trinomial 3. So it says, what is the product of negative 3x squared and 2x squared plus 3x plus 11? We have the horizontal method, the vertical method, the grid method. These are going to feel very much similar until we get to more complicated problems, but we just wanted to show you how it's set up. All right, the first way, the horizontal method. So here's the horizontal method set up. And what we're going to do is exactly what we did before, the distributive property. So this negative 3x squared is going to get sent into each term, and we multiply them. So I'm going to write this middle step, this intermediate step, but for the most part, this one is optional. We're just showing you what's happening, but you don't actually have to show that work yourself. So this negative 3x squared has to multiply the 2x squared. Next, the negative 3x squared has to multiply the negative 3x. Next, the negative 3x squared has got to multiply the 11 there times the 11. Like I said, this step is optional, just showing you what's happening. And now we start to simplify. Here we simplify. We have a negative 3 times a 2, so that gives me a negative 6. Next, we have an x squared times an x squared. If you forgot what the rule is here, what we have to do is add the exponents. So we get x to the 4th power. Next, we have a negative 3 times a negative 3, so that gives me a positive 9. Then we have an x squared times x to the 1st. So we add those exponents to get x to the 3rd. And then lastly, the negative 3 times the 11 is negative 33. And we just need to bring down that x squared. Box or circle your answer, and there we go. So another method we have is called the vertical method, which, as we've seen, we've already done that before up here, where we set it up vertically and we do distribute. This 8 goes here, and then the 8 goes there, and we work through that. We're going to do the exact same thing here, so it is going to be the distributive method, just set up slightly different. So the first thing we do, though, instead of starting on that end, we tend to start on this end. So we're going to multiply these two here. So negative 3x squared times the 11, and that gives me negative 33x squared. Next, we multiply these two. So a negative times a negative is a positive. 3 times 3 is 9, and x times x squared is x to the 3rd. So it's plus 9x cubed. And lastly, the negative 3x squared is going to multiply the positive 2x squared. So we get negative 6x. Add the exponents to get 4, and there we go. Notice my answers match as they should. The last method is called the grid method, sometimes called area model or box method or something like that. The idea is, since we are multiplying a monomial, a 1, by a trinomial, a 3, we end up having a 1 by 3 box. And what we do is we write the trinomial here and the monomial here, and the product goes inside. So this times this gives me the result there. Negative 3x squared times 2x squared gives me negative 6x squared. Now let's do that again. Negative 3x squared times negative 3 is positive 9x to the 3rd. And lastly, negative 3x squared times 11 is negative 33x squared. Now, there are no like terms in these boxes to combine, so I just bring them all together as a single polynomial, and we write it like so. Box or circle your answer, and notice, again, it matches like what they did before. Why do we want to teach that? It's because when we get to a slightly more complicated in a few minutes or in the next video, you're going to see that when we have a 2 by 3 or a 2 by 2, these things are much more helpful in keeping yourself organized. So turn the page here and let's look at some problems. Now it's your turn. Take these problems here and go ahead and work through all the methods and then pause the video, check your answer in just a moment. And here are the results, all of them being the same. The next video is about binomials times binomials.